What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Wrestling with Johners. This is episode 116, and we've recently done a retro pay-per-view review. We recently reviewed WrestleMania 8, and today we're going to step it up a little bit. We're going to go 12 months further ahead, and we're going to look at WrestleMania 9 from 1993. We do have a special guest on Skype to help us review WrestleMania 9, and we'll introduce that very special guest now. I want to introduce Mike Maddog Angus TNT, ring announcer. So, Mike, thank you for coming on the Wrestling with Johners podcast. How are you on this lovely sunny spring afternoon?
Yeah, wonderful, my friend. Good to speak to you. I'm just on lockdown at the moment, obviously. So I've been doing some homeschooling. My son is just having his lunch break now, so I thought this would be the ideal time to have a little catch up and have a little chat about wrestling for a little bit of time while he's doing a bit of Lego.
Absolutely. You know, there's no better thing to talk about when you've got a bit of downtime, especially when you're in lockdown, to talk about professional wrestling. And especially we're just days out from WrestleMania 36, and that's going to be a bit of a strange one. Similar to WrestleMania 9, I suppose it's going to be one of those that sticks out like a sore thumb as being a bit of a WrestleMania in the history books that wasn't the norm, and a little bit different. It's going to have no fans, of course. Will you be watching WrestleMania 36 over the 2 nights, Mike?
Yeah, certainly. I'll certainly do my best to watch it. I was meant to be hosting a party for Hooked on Events in Liverpool, so we were really looking forward to watching it then. And then obviously all this stuff that's gone on. It's going to be, as you say, a really different WrestleMania, similar to 9/9. Obviously was the Toga party. And then 36 is going to be remembered because it is going to be different. No fans. Let's see if they can pull it off, and good on them if they do, and if they don't, it'll give us something else to talk about anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first started speaking on Facebook through Messenger, you approached me. You mentioned that WrestleMania 9 was one of the first WrestleManias you remember as a kid growing up. One of the first shows that kind of drew you in as a fan. But tell us about kind of how your wrestling fandom started. Was it around this time, Mike?
Yeah, you know what it was. WrestleMania 10 was the first one I watched live, but WrestleMania 9 really, it did catch my eye. Definitely, it looked very visually different with it being outside, obviously at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. And I used to get like magazines from the little newsagents by mine, and one of the magazines I picked up was like I've got it by me now actually randomly. It's what was it called? It was The History of WrestleMania 1 to 9. It was a WrestleMania 10 collector's edition, and it had all sorts of stuff in, and especially the results from the first load of Manias. So that was a good one to look through. It had some iconic pictures, and it had the write-up. It was I think it was Keith Elliott Greenberg who wrote this magazine, but it was it's pretty interesting. That's great photos from the event and stuff, and bits and bobs like that really caught my eye as a child. And obviously there were some standout stories on this show. It looked back as being not everyone's favorite Mania, but it really does stand out. It's different. It's definitely different.
Yeah, it really was. And watching it back this week in preparation for this recording, it did bring back lots of wonderful memories. Now, WrestleMania 9, as we said, it's been criticised over time. It's been called the worst WrestleMania, one of the worst WrestleManias of all time. I probably wouldn't have it down as the worst, but despite its obvious lows, it did have some memorable moments and one or two okay matches in my opinion. But WrestleMania 9, it does have its defenders and it does have its critics. And maybe after watching it back this week, it's kind of made me think differently about the events and about this particular WWF showcase 27 years later. But watching it back yourself recently in preparation for this podcast, and I know you said you watched it back recently before we got in touch, so you've seen it back a couple of times recently. How has your mind changed much about the event? Obviously, you've got warm, fuzzy memories about WrestleMania 9 from back in the day, but what's your kind of overall thoughts on the show, having watched it back recently then, Mike?
Yeah, so there's bits of it that stood out a lot more than I expected. And you know what? I look on it a bit more favourably now because over time, my mind had sort of been soured on it a little bit. Things like listening to Bret Hart speak about it and, just the general thing about Hogan at the end, it's sort of viewed as being very negative. But then when I watched it back, I actually feel a lot more positive about it, to be honest, because I don't want to jump ahead too much, but the pop at the end of the main event, I'd dismissed that in my mind and thought that was terrible what had happened there, But when I look back at it, that was such a pop. The whole crowd are going nuts. And they're, at the end of the day, the crowd who are there have gone home happy from the show. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
So,
You got the feeling that they were definitely enjoying it in the outdoor arena. It was the first ever outdoor WrestleMania, but the fans loved it. They had a whale of a time. And, it was at Caesars Palace, Las Vegas, Nevada, the 4th of April, 1993. Now, whereas when we reviewed WrestleMania 8, that was from the Hoosier Dome, 67,000 people. We're used to WrestleMania being in big domes or big stadiums, 60, 70, 80 people or more. And this one was probably one of the lowest attended turnouts WrestleMania, mainly because of the setting, mainly because they used an arena that they had set up. They usually use it for boxing and things like that, but it's just 16,891 here at Caesars Palace, and the first ever outdoor WrestleMania. And it was kind of dressed to be like the Roman Colosseum, and the setting and kind of, like you say, it was really caught your eye, that the setting and the scenery and how they dressed up the ring and how they dressed up all the announcers. But we were introduced to the broadcast by Gorilla Monsoon in a toga, something we thought we'd never see. Then we were introduced to a fairly fresh-faced Jim Ross, making his WWF debut, having recently left WCW. We had Caesar and Cleopatra come down on an elephant. That was pretty good fun. Then we was introduced to Fincus Maximus. He then introduced Randy Savage being carried down on a sedan, being fed grapes by Vestal Virgins. Now, Mike, would you like to be carried anywhere on a sedan being fed grapes? That looked like a pretty neat gig for me.
It happens at TNT at the after parties quite a lot. You tend to find. So, it's something that's happened before. And then obviously after that was my favourite entrance. That's when Bobby the Brain Heenan comes out with his belly dancers, and he's on the camel, going backwards on the camel. So, a classic WrestleMania moment there.
Hilarious.
And when he falls off the camel, and Jim Ross is still trying to conduct it in a serious manner, and Macho Man's having a bit of a laugh. The little bits like that make me smile. Seeing them all having a good laugh together. And it's it's good banter, and it started to show off well. And then obviously you've got the opening bout.
Yeah,
So,
indeed. Yeah, I mean, going back to Bobby Heenan. I mean, we were talking in the WrestleMania 8 review that dropped over the weekend about what a fantastic pair him and Gorilla Monsoon was. Now, Gorilla didn't do much commentating after WrestleMania 8 through the rest of 1992 into 1993. Bobby Heenan was still there, but this was one of his last gigs on the microphone behind the desk in WWF at the time. But I mean, we were talking in the WrestleMania 8 review about what a comedy genius Bobby Heenan was then, and like I say, WrestleMania 9 he was much the same, and he probably did look genuinely terrified coming out backwards on the back of that camel. But I was watching it back yesterday morning with my daughter, who's not really a wrestling fan, but she was kind of captivated by what was going on and kind of the elephants and Cleopatra and all that. And when Bobby Heenan came out the back of the camel, even she laughed, and that made me kind of enjoy the moment even more. And definitely that was probably, looking back on it, probably one of the things that really stand out to me was Bobby Heenan's entrance. And on highlight packages of the Brain, that's one bit of footage that always gets shown. But definitely a fantastic way to start the show. I mean, you mentioned about the opening match, and we'll get to that very, very soon. But I don't know if a lot of our listeners were aware that there was a dark match. They tend to take these dark matches. Nowadays we have these really prolonged kickoff shows with like 2-hour shows and lots of matches on them. A lot of the dark matches weren't aired. There weren't kickoff matches back then, or kickoff shows. And there was a dark match with El Matador, Tito Santana, and Papa Shango. And of course, 12 months earlier, they were featured on the main card of WrestleMania 8, but not so much the case at WrestleMania 9. And both Shango and Santana had left the WWF before the end of 1993. So but then getting into the opening match then, Mike, Shawn Michaels, Intercontinental Champion, going up against Tatanka. Now, Shawn Michaels brought out Luna Vachon. Now, I think this was her first appearance on our WWF screens at the time. And Sherry Martel, she came out to accompany Tatanka. Now, Mike, this was one of the matches I was looking forward to back in 1993. I was about 16 years old at the time, so that's kind of giving away my age a little bit. But this is my second WrestleMania as a fan, and I was already more of a fan of the in-ring product, in-ring action, as opposed to the characters and the storylines, and I was definitely looking forward to this one. But what about yourself, my friend?
Yeah, no, certainly it was. It's a real a great opener to the show, and obviously they trusted Sean to open the show the year before, and then obviously WrestleMania 9 Tatanka as well, great guy. One thing I always remember is Tatanka has the same birthday as me, so anytime I've met Tatanka, I always make sure to tell him that. So, but he's still going, and at this time he was on his hot winning streak. And it was a really interesting clash because obviously I was, let me think, I was 9 at the time. So, so it was interesting to see because Sean was obviously really up and coming. He'd had the storyline with Marty Jannetty, and I believe somebody said Marty was meant to be coming in to have the match against Sean at this show as well. But then his arrest and bits and bobs like that, leaving the company, sort of soured that, and it was Tatanka who had the shot instead. And the match on paper looked like it was going to be amazing, and watching it as well, it turned out as a classic encounter. Sean with the great heel work, and then the only thing that let it down, I think, is the a really odd finish. I thought it was a real strange finish to that one. Watching it back, what did you think yourself?
Yeah, well, as I said, this was the match I was most looking forward to. Tatanka was on his hot undefeated streak. I think he went well over a year undefeated, and they were really building him up. And I as much of a fan of Michaels at the time, I really wanted Tatanka to go over. I thought they were pushing him well. I thought this was kind of the ideal opportunity for them to put him over for the IC champ, but they never did that. And then, like you say, Tatanka was seemingly getting the upper hand towards the end of the match. And then for some bizarre reason, Shawn Michaels, he pulled the referee to the outside underneath the bottom rope for some unknown reason. Tatanka then hits his finishing move on Shawn Michaels, but the referee had already made up his mind, calls for the bell and gives DQ win to Tatanka. So Tatanka wins the match, but as we all know, doesn't win the championship. Looking back on this match, Mike, I think you hit the nail on the head. It was a really good match. I think it did deliver on many fronts. And you rightly mentioned that not only did Shawn Michaels open the show at that WrestleMania 9, he did at WrestleMania 8, but he also opened the show at WrestleMania 7. So this was his third WrestleMania, because he's part of the Rockers, of course, and they opened against the Barbarian and Haku at WrestleMania 7. So, for some reason, they obviously trusted Shawn Michaels to go out there and deliver a hot match and get the crowd going, and he certainly did here. But a bit of a letdown to an end of the match, I must say. The other highlight of the match, in my opinion, was the little scrap that took place after the match between Sherry and Luna. That was pretty good. I think they had a little post-WrestleMania feud after this as well. But then, I think this all kind of lived up to Sean's heel character, Sean's heel persona, and doing something heelish to keep hold of the belt, which is what certainly happened here. An interesting match to get the show going. Certainly one of the highlights or one of the better matches of the show. But then we get into what I think was my match of the night then, Mike, and it was the Steiners versus the Head Shrinkers. So this was another match that I was really looking forward to going into. 16-year-old Johners looking forward to WrestleMania 9. This was, two solid teams, two exciting teams, two experienced tag teams, and I wasn't disappointed. I really loved the fact that the Steiners were in the WWF as well, after seeing so many of their matches on WCW VHS tapes that I was able to acquire back in the day. But one thing that really stands out in this match, 27 years on, was how stiff both teams were. This was a really solid encounter, and one spot in particular that really stands out in my mind and makes me wince just as much today as it did back then was when the Head Shrinkers, they kind of tossed Scott Steiner almost head first over the top rope. I think he probably went between the top and the middle rope, landed head first. It took him pretty much the rest of the match to recover. And then you had Rick Steiner. He hit a pretty impressive like a power slam off the shoulders of Fatu, dropping Samu, and then Scott Steiner came in, hit a bit of a dodgy Frankensteiner, but a Frankensteiner nonetheless. It was, but he was probably still a bit dizzy from the move before. And then the Steiners picked up their first and only WrestleMania win, and the Steiners were gone before WrestleMania 10 in 1994. But honestly, one of the best matches on the show, and a match that I remember quite fondly even to this day. But looking back on this one, Mike, what stood out to you, and does it stand the test of time?
Yeah, well, I'd watched the Steiners for on videos and stuff at the time as well. So I had Steiners versus Doom from WCW days that I'd watched. So I knew what the Steiners could bring. And the Head Shrinkers at that time were really coming through with Afro, and they'd obviously been around a little while as like the Samoan SWAT team, was it? And they had they always impressed in the matches leading up to that. interesting thing I noticed was when I was listening to it back, I noticed a few cracking comments towards the end of the Tatanka and Michaels contest. It actually randomly, I think the ref gave a count out in the end in that one. When I watched it last night, I'd always thought it was a DQ myself, and then he actually gives a count out, which is even more obscure. And the thing that made me notice it even more was that Macho Man goes, "Tatanka's got nothing to be ashamed of. The referee, on the other hand," drops that into the commentary.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely. But I mean, were you a fan of? You said you're a fan of the Steiners and the Head Shrinkers going into this one, but it was such a hard-hitting match, wasn't it? It's pretty stiff, and you didn't really get stiff matches like this in the WWF back in the day. But yeah, that's what really stands out to me. But what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so it was stiff, definitely. And, even like just after Steiners took that bump over the top, which is horrific to watch back. I've watched it back a few times now because I'd never spotted that before. And then when I watched it back last week, I was just like, oh my God, he goes over the top rope. And I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know if Samu has took a bit of a slip as he's gone to throw him over, and Fatu's meant to pull the top rope down. But it just ends up with Steiner literally flying like 15 feet down just onto his... He must have landed on his face and his chest. It's a horrific botch, and it's just one of them things. You pick up a knock, but then as soon as he gets up from that, Afa hits him with whatever that little garden ornament is he's carrying about as well, as hard as he can.
Yeah. But Scott Steiner was a tough dude, though. He was a tough dude. They were both solid dudes, weren't they?
Yeah, and that's when Macho Man comes out with the classic. He's not a manager. He's a trainer of viciousness.
Oh, yeah. Macho Man, we do miss you. We do miss you. But hell of an encounter.
Yeah, and of course the move that really stands out as well is obviously when Rick's up on the shoulders of the guys going for their finish, and he hits that big power slam off the top. That's a really impressive move and does stand out. And that obviously changes the tide in the match. And then Scott hits almost a full Frankensteiner, which is, a sick move, but he almost hits it. It's close.
Yeah, it was good enough. It was good enough, and still looked pretty good. But loved that match. Loved watching that back, and that's one of the matches I could easily, rewatch time and time again. Love those two teams, and it was such a shame that they didn't do more with the Steiners back in the day. But yeah, there we go. And then another interesting match, but for different reasons, you could say. Doink the Clown versus Crush. Now, to completely contradict what I said at the top of the show, where I said I was more of a fan of the kind of in-ring action as opposed to characters, I was a big fan of Doink the Clown. I was a big fan especially of the evil clown played by Matt Bourne at the time. I think he played the evil clown to perfection, and not only was he an excellent evil clown, he was an excellent wrestler, very, very good in the ring, which kind of, made me enjoy his work even more. I was also a bit of a fan of Kona Crush as well here in 1993. I thought that the WWF had big plans for Crush at the time. He had the look, he had the size, he had some, fairly good moves. He was popular with the fans. And I thought they was going to push him as a future champion. That didn't quite transpire. If we skip ahead 12 months, he's a big, nasty heel going up against Randy Savage at WrestleMania 10. But what were your thoughts on Crush and Doink the Clown back then? I mean, what did you say? You was about 8 or 9 years old at the time, Mike. These must be two quite interesting characters back in the day.
Exactly. Well, Crush stands out as such a colourful character. At the time, I didn't even realise he was the Crush who I'd seen in Demolition, because obviously I'd watched all the videos from the VHS store, and I knew my history to that point, and watching this one, I was watching it back, and this was probably my favourite storyline on the show at the time. And still looking back at it, it really stands out as a great story. It's one I find people who don't watch wrestling can watch that story and still be entertained. And I found I had Year in Review 93, a VHS, and it really showed the whole feud. So it showed the bit leading up to it where Doink had took his arm off and hit Crush, and Crush the Doink, the whole crowd are chanting, and then he's took his own arm off, and then it whacks him with that, and that was the shock of the people in the crowd when he does that is is completely different. And as you said, Matt Bourne as Doink, the heel Doink, was just amazing, and he said before this match he's bringing a sense of humour to the party, and by the end of the show, Crush is going to be seeing double vision, and nobody caught onto that. And then obviously when the match itself happens, I think in a way it's a masterpiece of how that match works, because it just it's completely different, isn't it? And it's just brilliant. And Bobby Heenan's commentary again on that, where he's saying it's an illusion at the end. Obviously when the second Doink appears and beats Crush down with him, and then they do the whole David Copperfield thing. It's just amazing. And Bobby Heenan says it's the greatest trick I've ever seen. It's an illusion. It's just something special. It's really great to look back on. And even more interesting, I saw that Dave Meltzer said that the original idea wasn't to have a second Doink, but was for some sort of paint to spray out of the top of Doink's wig into Crush's face when he hits his finisher, and to blind Crush. But I'm glad they went with the double Doinks, because it's a great moment. And although after that he's sort of frowned upon Doink, especially when it became Steve Kern. It's not looked back on as fondly, but that heel Doink, I just think it's great. And that really in a way has stood the test of time, because it's still watchable, and it's still just, my son watched it yesterday and he was just laughing his head off. It's great. Just what are your opinions on you?
Yeah, I mean, the match wasn't anything to talk about, but certainly, the double Doink was pretty damn special. And I liked what you said there about Dave Meltzer. I read the same thing, that they had this little contraption set up in his wig, and when Crush did the cranium crusher, that he was going to get sprayed in the face, and that would have been fun as well. That would have been quite a unique end to the match, you could say. But double Doink worked, but I kind of saw that as kind of the beginning of the end, really, for Doink, as you kind of alluded to earlier, because as soon as they started doing multiple Doinks, it kind of diluted the mystique of the evil Doink. And certainly Matt Bourne left the WWF, and then you had Ray Apollo and Steve Kern and various other people playing Doink. They turned him babyface. Then they introduced Little Dink. I'm sure you remember him, and it kind of fell off a cliff after that. But I'll always have fond memories of that kind of initial year of Doink the Clown, the evil clown. And he'll always go down as one of my favourite characters, because it really, really worked. It scared the kids in the audience. The adults really kind of got a kick out of it, and he could put on a good show in the ring as well. But let's skip forward to the next match then, Mike. And it was a bit of a nothing match, really, to be honest with you. And it only went about 3 or 4 minutes, to be fair. Razor Ramon versus Bob Backlund. Now, I always thought this was a bit of a strange pairing on a WrestleMania card, to be honest with you. But back then, WWF did things like this, where they had two wrestlers, that they didn't really know what to do with, but they wanted to put on this show to give them a WrestleMania payday and to give them a bit of extra exposure. But if you think about it, Razor Ramon, he was in the WWF title match, the previous pay-per-view at the Royal Rumble against Bret Hart. And here he is kind of, on the show of shows against Bob Backlund. He's returning to the WWF after however many years being out, 43 years old, former WWF champion. And, it only went 3 minutes in. What was even more strange about this one was it ended up in kind of like a bit of a roll-up finish with Razor Ramon getting the win. So a bit of a nothing match, but any memories coming back about this one in particular?
Yeah, you know what? The match itself didn't stand out at the time, but looking back at it and reading the article that went with it, the way they were trying to play it was that Razor was the bad guy at the time. Obviously, he was big heel, all in black at Mania. Backlund, the returning hero, and it really sort of backfired on WWE, because Backlund came out in the US jacket. He'd been away for 8 years, and obviously it was meant to be a big homecoming, wrestling champ. And the idea obviously was to get Razor over as a wrestler, because I believe. And anyway, when the match starts, straight away, the crowd are firmly behind Razor, which is not what they want. And it's one of the first times that I've ever thought that a crowd has completely rebelled against what they're meant to think, because they're chanting Razor, Razor, and commentary acknowledge it. And then obviously the match itself is really is very short, and then Razor wins with the schoolboy roll up, and it's really odd, I think, but it gets Razor over. The idea is to get Razor over and show that he can be a wrestler as well. He's beat the former champion who's come back, and it's odd that Backlund's lost in his first match back, but there's that sort of playing to the start of him starting to go a bit mad, do you think? Is that the idea behind that story, maybe, do you think?
Because I think it was I know that it was 2 years later that he had his submission match with Bret Hart at WrestleMania 11, which is also kind of looked at in not very favourable eyes to many fans. But it probably wasn't too far after this where things started to change for Backlund. I thought his heel character was far more entertaining, much more watchable, to be honest with you. But I really wanted to see Razor Ramon hit the Razor's Edge in this match. I think that would have been a really quite a big, impactful move. I loved the Razor's Edge as a kid. I thought it was probably the best finisher back in the early 90s, to be honest with you. It just looked tremendous. And Razor being that big, what was he, 6'5", 6'6" character, just looked tremendous. But like I say, an easily forgettable match, but a good win for Razor Ramon nonetheless. But then we got a kind of a backstage segment with tag team champions Money Inc. And they were talking about how Hulk Hogan got apparently jumped by some cronies at a gym the night before, sporting a vicious black eye, which we'll get to see in the next match. Now, Mike, there's always been these massive conspiracy theories about how Hogan got his shiner prior to WrestleMania 9, the night before WrestleMania 9. And one popular urban legend or conspiracy theory is that Hogan got into a legit fight with Randy Savage the night before Mania, and that it was Randy who gave him the black eye. In an argument over Randy's ex-wife, Elizabeth, apparently hiding out at Hogan's Malibu beach house with Hogan's then wife, Linda, because of Liz's apparent living in fear of Randy. He was obviously desperately kind of jealous of anything she did. And apparently he was kind of concerned that she was having a friendship, shall we say, with Hogan's friends, so kind of hiding out with Linda at the Malibu beach house. But apparently it was Randy Savage that gave Hogan the black eye. But any thoughts on these kind of urban legends and these myths about how Hogan got his mysterious black eye at WrestleMania 9, my friend?
Yeah, well, the original story that WWF peddled was that he'd had a water skiing incident, a jet ski incident the week before, and he'd come off the jet ski and hurt himself. Which is feasible. However, it's Dave Meltzer, and it's a Doink the Clown rumor I heard. It's a Matt Bourne one that Matt mentioned, and it's on Dark Side of the Ring as well. That sort of story would fit the timeline, wouldn't it? From that, but well, I noticed I was looking out for it specifically when I watched the match, and as he's coming out, Macho Man says a particular line. I think he says something along the lines of, "Oh, they took him good," or something like that as he's coming out. And it just makes me think if it is him who has drilled him, then it's he's obviously being fed lines of what he's meant to say, and he's covered up quite well for it, because listening to the commentary, you wouldn't think that the guy who's just beat him up for that is so it's either Macho Man being absolutely top professional or the rumor is not founded. So we'll have to see. I'm sure Definitely. More will come of it out of some sort of shoot interview with Hogan or something in the future. The story will come out eventually.
Yeah, definitely. But that led us into the tag team title match. You had current champions going into it, Money Inc. versus Hulk Hogan and Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Now, did you know, Mike, that the original challengers for Money Inc.'s gold at WrestleMania 9 was meant to be the Nasty Boys, who were they were feuding with the champions from about October 92 through to February 93. That was until Brutus Beefcake, he came back onto the scene. He got roughed up by DiBiase and IRS on an episode of Monday Night Raw, leading to the return of the Hulkster, and the rest, as they say, is history. But the Nasty Boys, they were legendary heels, but turned babyface at the back end of '92, and everybody had them penciled as the opponents for Money Inc. at WrestleMania, but that didn't happen.
Yeah, well, the thing that actually led to the Nasty Boys turning face was one of my favourite ever matches. It was when the Nasties beat down Money Inc. because Money Inc. had got the title shot against the Natural Disasters on I think it might have been an episode of Challenge or something, and that is one of my favourite matches ever because IRS gets beat up before the match by the Nasties, and $1 Million Man and Jimmy Hart, they're all still there and everything, and then they have the match against the Natural Disasters. And it's where Earthquake hits his head on the guardrail at the side and goes down to the $1 Million Dream. And Money Inc., take the belts. And then after that's when the Nasty Boys come out and throw Jimmy Hart off the stage onto Money Inc. and set that feud off. And I think it's a shame that they didn't get to do the Nasty Boys Money Inc. match. I would have loved that. And it's nice that Brutus came back in, and that the storyline was great with Brutus getting waffled in the face with the briefcase on Raw. As a child, that was a really shocking one because they had the bit of blood about the ring and everything, didn't they? If you remember that,
Yeah.
the canvas was covered in blood from that one. So as a child, I was like, oh my goodness, what have they done to Brutus? But it's a different way of bringing Hogan and the Mega Maniacs back in and Jimmy, and I think. In a way, it's a shame that Nasties didn't get the big match against Money Inc. I think that may have been a better match, to be honest, than what we actually ended up getting. But you had to have Hogan and Brutus on the card somewhere, and it was at the time it was a big draw for people to, I'm sure having the Mega Maniacs on would have got people watching. So they make their decisions, don't they, for them reasons. So
I think it was all part of Vince McMahon's kind of grand plan, as well as we talk about kind of at the back end of the podcast. But as you mentioned, it wasn't really a fantastic match. It went 18 minutes. It was the longest match on the card, longest match on the show, with Money Inc. eventually retaining the championships via disqualification. We had Hogan, Beefcake, and Jimmy Hart. They roughed up one of the officials, one of the referees at the end of the match. The crowd were definitely into it, though. The crowd were definitely into Hogan and his pose downs. More than they were the in-ring stuff, let's be honest. But Mike, I've got to be honest, even I knew back then, 1993, that Hogan was a couple of years past his prime, let's be honest, as the face of the company, just made his return back in 1993. But here, especially alongside Beefcake and Jimmy Hart, Hogan just seemed a bit of a parody of his former self, to be honest with you. But Mike, I've got to ask you, 1993, you were a youngster. Were you a little Hulkamaniac back in the day?
Yeah, I think I was. I'd watched Hulk Hogan's greatest hits VHS. I'd watched WrestleMania 5, 6, all the early WrestleManias, and I was a big fan. But I never watched this match back in the day randomly. It's only one I've watched back since. And Hulk looks very lean in this match. Was something I noticed. I didn't like the ending again. Another poor ending to a match, and it doesn't really jump out to me, this one at all. Jimmy Hart turning his jacket inside out to the ref's jacket was probably the biggest pop of the match. And it was just it was the early part of this card, the Tatanga Shawn Michaels, the Steiner Head Shrinkers, and then even the Doink and Crush was probably the best part of the show for me. And I find the tail end of it really lost its way, but Backlund Razor Ramon was not great, and this tag match was not what it could have been. You know what I mean? And Ted and IRS, I normally love their matches, but they it just doesn't mesh well at all. Their style and with Hogan and Beefcake, it's a two different sort of styles of wrestling. Tag versus two very sort of it's the hulking up and all that, isn't it? So it just doesn't mesh well for me, that match, unfortunately. So.
Totally agree. And a good excuse, I suppose, for them to get Hogan on the card. And as we know, when we get to the main events, obviously another reason to have him around to do what happened in the end. But the next match was a match that I was quite looking forward to. Back as a 16-year-old John as the narcissist, Lex Luger versus Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig. Now I've got to say, as good as an entrance they gave Lex Luger on this one, the pop that Mr. Perfect got when he came out was something else. I thought he got an excellent reception when he came out, and he looked great. This was one of the matches I was looking forward to. Back then, I thought, two experienced wrestlers, a bit of a dream match, or so I thought. And then the bell rang. Lex Luger was never one to really deliver, to be honest with you, when the bell rang. But Mr. Perfect never had a bad match as far as I was concerned. He still was showing that pace around the ring, the way he was doing his leapfrogs and his excellent drop kicks. His drop kicks were second to none, let's be honest. But Lex Luger was really being carried in that match by Mr. Perfect. But Vince was a body guy, and Lex Luger was the epitome of being a body guy. But however, it was Luger who picked up the win in this one with another weak finish, let's be honest, a bit of a backslide. After 10 and a half minutes, the referee failing to notice that Perfect's feet or legs or pretty much the whole of his body was on the ropes, but the referee didn't pick it up, counted to 3 anyway. But after the match, Luger laid out Perfect with his loaded running forearm. Of course, he had his titanium plate in his right arm after a motorcycle accident. And then when Perfect came to, he went backstage, got involved in a bit of a scrap, a bit of a backstage backstage fight with Shawn Michaels. And to be honest with you, that was better than anything that happened in the ring with Luger in the prior match. So I really enjoyed that backstage scrap, and that did lead to a bit of a feud between Michaels and Perfect. I think they had a match at King of the Ring 93, which I really enjoyed. But give us your thoughts on the Narcissist and Mr. Perfect and how this match went down.
Yeah, so I'd seen Lex Luger previous on WCW, and I think they did a good job of building him up as being, the Florida guy, and, Jim Ross talked him up a treat on that. There was a match he had with Ric Flair. I think it was Capital Combat in the cage, and, you could buy into Lex from that. It made him look like a great wrestler and everything. And it was just a shame that when he came to the Narcissist, his frailties were exposed, unfortunately, and against Perfect, who is, one of the best wrestlers ever. They didn't mesh, they didn't click at all. Perfect, the stuff he does, executed brilliantly, and Luger unfortunately, he wasn't at this time. The match just wasn't right. It didn't work. As you say, the backslide into the ropes just didn't work, and the match was just a waste of time at the end of the day. Luger's entrance was the best thing that came of it for him, and the best thing that came of Perfect was afterwards with Shawn Michaels setting that up with the where they set up the feud with Michaels, and he went through the windshield outside Madison Square Garden and all that. So that was that led into like a decent little feud, as you said, with didn't Marty Jannetty sort of come back on the tail end of that as well?
I think that was around the time, but
when Marty won the Intercontinental title, and then when he set Perfect through the towel in his face, didn't he? So that makes a bit more sense now from linking them together. But the match itself, Luger and Perfect, not a great one, unfortunately.
Yeah, and we were only a few months away from him turning Luger babyface, and of course they saw Luger as the next kind of golden goose, you could say, went on the Lex Express, all kind of leading to WrestleMania 10 or leading to SummerSlam 93. So it was quite a quick turnaround from being this dastardly heel to this beloved babyface, the Lex Express, the SummerSlam match, which I think that ended in a count out victory, and they kind of hoisted Lex aloft as if he'd kind of won the championship, but that wasn't to be. And then he still didn't have his crowning moment at WrestleMania 10, and they kind of left that for Bret Hart to kind of steal the moment, as he much deserved. But it didn't quite happen for Lex Luger in the WWF, did it? I mean, he did have a tag title run with Davey Boy Smith, I think, a year or so later. But I think they obviously soured a little bit on Lex Luger because they realised that he wasn't all that.
Yeah, I think the best moment they did with him was when he slammed Yokozuna on the USS Intrepid, for the July the 4th thing. That was sort of the turning point for him there. And that was a really well played out angle. Crush, Scott Steiner, Macho Man had all tried to body slam Yokozuna, and then they built it up, with the helicopter coming in, and it was Lex, and he had his USA Stars and Stripes T-shirt on, and suddenly he's not the Narcissist anymore. He's a proud US citizen, and the commentary put him over and everything, and it was and then he slammed Yoko after hitting him with the forearm, and that was a huge moment for him, and it could have gone well from there. But even then, with the Lex Express and everything, they sort of they lost the way, because all the time, Bret Hart's winning match after match after match, and the excellence of execution, and Luger's out on a bus, going around the nation shaking hands with people. So your wrestling fans are going to pick out of that, straight away.
Yeah, definitely. I think the funniest story I heard about the body slam challenge on the USS Intrepid or whatever it was I think they were out there for hours, and it was like 40-degree heat. It was a bloody hot day, and even more hot being out on the Intrepid. And the ring canvas was really, really hot. And Mr. Fuji, he kind of took away Yokozuna's flip-flops and kind of threw them away. So for the entire duration that Yokozuna was out there, he had to stand in this boiling hot ring, just with his feet, and kind of he was doing a funny little hop and dance and trying to keep his feet cool, but and trying to keep it professional for the cameras as well as the challenges were coming up. But Mr. Fuji was the king of ribs, and I think he definitely played a pretty good rib on Yokozuna that day. But there we go. That leads us nicely to kind of the semi-final match, you could say, the second to last match, and another weird and wonderful match that's looked back on kind of fairly unpopular with a lot of wrestling fans and traditionalists, but it was the Giant Gonzalez, accompanied to the ring by Harvey Whippleman versus The Undertaker. Now, looking back on this match today, I feel completely different to how I felt kind of watching it 27 years ago. Now, maybe I've mellowed a little bit as a bit more of a mature wrestling fan as I've kind of come into my 40s. But, I enjoyed this match watching it back this week, possibly because it was quite short. And I think it needed to be a short match, to be honest with you. But I also enjoyed it watching it back because it was one of just a few matches that the Giant Gonzalez had in the WWF. He didn't have a prolonged stay back in the 90s. But this was also one of the only matches I can remember The Undertaker being dominated and manhandled pretty much throughout the whole match, especially in a WrestleMania match, which we know, he built up a dominant undefeated streak. But give us your thoughts on this one then. But a bit of a weird one. You had the 8-foot tall Giant Gonzalez, the 6'10" The Undertaker. So obviously back then they liked to pair The Undertaker up with the weird and wonderful monsters and characters that would come into WWF from time to time. But this one, as a WrestleMania match for The Undertaker, was quite unique, wasn't it?
Yeah, out of all his WrestleMania matches, I know a lot of people say it was his worst one. Gonzalez was El Gigante in WCW, wasn't he? He was a former basketball player. Where was he from? Colombia, was he?
Argentina,
yeah, and he's legitimately was a giant. So, it was just unfortunate that he never really it never really worked out for him. As a child, he stood out to me as being, he was a monster, and he looked, I had the stickers and everything. He was featured in the sticker albums and all that, so he looked great. But then, obviously, The Undertaker, the standout part for this was his entrance with the vulture and the hearse and everything.
Yeah.
Really good pageantry. And especially, even with it being outside, it's still, it added to it even more, because it was just like, what is this monster? He was horrific, and, you've got The Undertaker coming out and everything, and then Giant Gonzalez is 8 foot tall and everything, and it's, it could have been, something really special. But as it was another random finish with one of the most random finishes ever. Just isn't Harvey bringing chloroform into it and everything? It's like ends with a random DQ. So a DQ win for Taker. So the streak is intact in its early days, but it's I don't know what they were thinking really with the finish there and the story.
Well, that's when they tried to hide from the history books, isn't it? Really, because they show us all the classic endings and all the classic matches when we have the kind of the highlights package of Undertaker's kind of WrestleMania career, but they don't kind of dwell too long on his Giant Gonzalez feud and the chloroform ending. It certainly was unique, and the Undertaker didn't win like he would usually win via pinfall. It's a very strange disqualification ending, but quite a unique ending nonetheless. But I don't think the Undertaker has ever forgiven Bruce Pritchard, because I think it's Bruce Pritchard that kind of paired these two together and suggested a WrestleMania match, and I think the Undertaker still holds it against Pritchard to this day. I thought it was fairly entertaining. Watching it back 27 years later, I was mildly entertained. Like I say, the entrances were good, especially the Undertaker's entrance. The fact that the Undertaker was manhandled for the majority of the 7 minutes that it went ahead. But let's talk about the biggest talking point in this whole match. Let's be honest, Mike, is a Giant Gonzalez's outfit. Now, is this something that you would do your weekly shop in, Mike? Would you go down to Tesco's or Aldi in a Giant Gonzalez costume with the furry codpiece? Is that something that you'd put on your shopping list for Halloween this year?
Well, last night I was doing a couple of little chats to friends, and I was dressed as Ric Flair. So, I probably would wear that down to Aldi, but not many other people would. It was definitely a very strange outfit with his muscles painted on and his a bit of a man wig, or whatever you want to call that particular piece of hair that he had with him. But it was really odd, and definitely a different look for him. He looked scarier than before. When he was El Gigante, he looked a bit cartoonish, didn't he? But when he was Giant Gonzalez, he did look like a bit of a some sort of monster from Greek mythology or something.
Bit of a Yeti or something, yeah.
He definitely was. He was on his way to being the Yeti, wasn't he? So, it didn't. It just looks weird. I just looked at a picture of it now. It is very odd. He's even got hair sort of down the sides of his legs.
Having a costume like that would certainly be good for social distancing, put it that way. So that could definitely work in today's environment. But let's talk about the main event then. So Bret the Hitman Hart, WWF champion, going into the match against Yokozuna. Now, in a pre-match interview, Hulk Hogan said that he wanted a shot at the winner of the main event. Little did we know what was about to end the main event match. But what was amazing to me was Yokozuna. This was his first WrestleMania. He'd already headlined, the biggest show of the year by this point at WrestleMania, of course. And in fact, he had one of the greatest first years, in my opinion, in anybody in WWF history. If you think about it, he won the 1993 Royal Rumble to earn his championship shot at Mania. He main events the match at Mania. He wins the championship, but very briefly, we'll talk about that in a moment. But he wins it twice over a 12-month span, beating Bret Hart at WrestleMania 9 and then Hogan at King of the Ring that year. Now, people talk about great first years in the company, the likes of Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle and Ronda Rousey, but people often forget what a dominant monster and what a dominant champion Yokozuna was, especially in his first 12 months, Mike.
Yeah, no, they did a great job of building him up. They had a lot of squash matches, and if you watch that year in Review 93 that I watched, it has a whole sort of 5-minute segment on Yokozuna, just showing him how he comes to the ring, how they did the great little entrance for him with the salt, and the ladies bringing flowers to him, very traditional. He was Japanese, he was the Japanese enemy, that's how they build him. And he was a monster, he could move, he was a very good, he was a very good athlete. Obviously, he got to like a huge size quite quickly there. And I think they used him very well. And at that time, I was a big Bret Hart fan. For my 8th birthday, I've got a Bret Hitman Hart card. And, Yokozuna, Bret took a while to win the championship in my eyes. And I was happy they had it. But, Yokozuna was a big threat coming in. And, he was a monster. And they did so well building him, I thought. And an interesting aside is that a couple of years later, my dad was a taxi driver in Liverpool. And actually, just before Yokozuna passed away, my dad gave Yokozuna a lift in his taxi, and they had to put the back seats down in the car to carry Yokozuna in the back. And he signed an autograph for me, so I've got there on it's on one of the taxi receipts. To Mike, all the best, WWF 2-time champion Yokozuna. So just an interesting piece of my in my memorabilia collection.
Oh, that's a fantastic story. Yeah, what a great story.
And I've heard everyone who speaks about Yoko says he was such a great guy. I did actually see him wrestle during that tour as well. I believe it was at the Liverpool Empire as part of the, I think it was part of one of All Stars shows. And I think I think Earthquake might have been on it. Greg Valentine, the Barbarian, Jake the Snake may have been there, Marty Jannetty. And there was sort of a gang of them who'd all come over. And I saw Yoko just before he passed away, so that was a great little tour to go to, So, but in this event, he was the big monster, and Bret tried so hard, you could see, to make that match good. And watching it back again, you can see the efforts Bret goes to try and make that a great match. And in my eyes, it still is a decent match. And even like the ending is, you can see what they're thinking and what the thought process was. So Bret was my favourite at the time, and I think Yoko, he does his best in the match, and it is what it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was another fascinating match, and it went nearly 9 minutes, 8 minutes 55 seconds. But according to the history books and one or two reports that have come out from Bret Hart, one or two others, this match kind of went home early, and they did have quite a few other spots kind of planned for the match. But apparently, Yoko and Bret decided to go home early because Yoko was just exhausted from the time being in the ring, and Bret had all these big spots planned for the end of the match, which would have really kind of put a bit of a shine on him before he lost the championship. But they decided to go home early. Bret did applied the sharpshooter rather awkwardly, but Mr. Fuji threw some salt into Bret's eyes. And I thought at the time, kind of thinking back through my memory, that Yoko kind of finished a match with a leg drop, but he just covered after the salt angle, the salt spot, and covered and was the new champion. So like I say, the match itself was okay. Like I say, it would have been nice if it went another 3, 4, 5 minutes so that Bret could have got a few more moves in. But I suppose it is what it is. But Then we had the Hulkster, Hulk Hogan. He came out to tend to his blinded friend, to the blinded Bret Hart. Mr. Fuji foolishly challenges Hogan to a championship match there, and then Hogan accepts. And like the bully that Hogan was back then, he clotheslined poor old Mr. Fuji.
Yeah.
One big boot and a leg drop of doom later, Hogan pins Yokozuna to become the 5-time WWF champion in only 22 seconds. So, I personally felt that at the time, the WWF were making a bit of a youth movements. They were pushing the likes of Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Yokozuna, The Undertaker, and so many more in this youth movement. Then Hogan comes back, and I found it was a bit of a step backwards for the company at the time. As I mentioned earlier, there were so many others, that should have been kind of positioned and doing what Hogan was doing at the time, and Hart really deserved kind of to be the one kind of with the championship at the end, or at the very least Yokozuna should have ended WrestleMania as the champion. But there's many others that feel that Hogan was past his prime at this time, especially as the yellow and red babyface hero. Of course, he turned things around when he turned heel as Hollywood Hogan in WCW from '96 onwards. Now, watching this back, did you get the same feelings 27 years later that there was a double title change, putting a belt on Yoko and then onto the Immortal one to close the show? But, how did this ending kind of sit with you when you were 9 years old, and how does it sit with you now, 27 years later, Mike?
Well, you know what? I've probably gone full circle on it, to be honest. When I first watched it as a kid, I was devastated that Yokozuna took Bret's title off him. And then when Mr. Fuji was going, "Come on, Hogan, you yellow belly, you yellow belly," and Hogan accepts the challenge, and Bret said, "Go, you get it out blinded." It all made sense, and it was and I was there dancing up and down and happy that he'd won it. Still thinking, oh, he's the great Hulk Hogan, and the fans in attendance were all buzzing about it by the looks of him. When you watch it back, the whole crowd's on its feet. There's a huge pop, and everyone's happy. But then, as time goes on and you learn a bit more about the industry, and you learn about, you get to watch the history of what's happened, and you sort of think, oh, that was really shitty on Bret, for that to happen. And it shouldn't have been like that. And you hear Bret talk about it, and how he sarcastically, he's like, "Go get him, Hogan," and all that, And then you see Hogan at the end saying, "Don't mess with Mother Nature, brother," or whatever. It's like, I sort of really soured on it. But then watching it back again, it came, this week, I sort of watched it again for what it was, and sort of thought, they got Bret got a lot of his stuff and he looked good. Yoko looked like a monster. And then Hogan came away with the belt, which I don't think what happened after that was what they were hoping would have happened from it. They were probably hoping Hogan would build someone else up and, make them look good, in the following months. But really, just from WrestleMania 9 itself, it was a good ending to the show with Hogan going out as the champ, I think. But it's obviously looked back on unfavorably by a lot of people who, know how hard Bret had worked, and, and even how hard they built Yoko, how well they built Yoko up. It seemed, a bit mad for him to just lose straight away. But, this is wrestling, and, WrestleMania 9, that was the ending of it. It was, it was different. It certainly would have been talked about, So, yeah, I think there was I think it was a rare, at the time I was a fan of it. I look back now and I think it was what it was.
Yeah, it's definitely a fun and interesting show. It really, really was. And it was great fun to kind of look back on it. Now, I must admit, I remember watching it live at the time. I think I had Sky Sports or Sky Movies where it was shown live back in 1993. But I haven't seen it back too many times since, to be honest with you, because it's, that ending especially left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. But I did enjoy watching it back. But before we kind of say goodbye, I just want to hit you with a few kind of interesting facts regarding WrestleMania 9. And some you may or may not know, but one interesting fact is that Hulk Hogan, his tag title match in the middle of the show against Money Inc., when he teamed with Brutus Beefcake, of course, that made Hogan the first wrestler in WWF history to compete for the WWF title, the Intercontinental title, and the tag team titles at WrestleMania. It's the first ever kind of wrestler to achieve a hat trick of title matches in WrestleMania history. And the second wrestler to achieve that hat trick on the same show, amazingly, was Bret Hart, because then he appeared at WrestleMania defending the WWF Championship. He was previously an Intercontinental Champion, and which he defended at WrestleMania 8, and previously a Tag Team Champion, which he defended on an earlier WrestleMania. So an interesting fact there. One other final fact I'm going to leave you with is that Bret Hart didn't know that he was going to be dropping the title until just 24 hours before the show itself. And I've got an inkling of a suspicion that Hogan knew that he was walking out of Las Vegas with the championship before Brett knew he was going to drop it to Yoko. But give us your kind of overriding memories, your overriding takeaways of WrestleMania 9 that will kind of live with you, as a wrestling fan, having seen it back this week for this review then, Mike.
Yeah, so I think a big part of it that really stands out from my childhood was really the pageantry of it. The fact that it was in the Caesars Palace car park, all the Roman theming and everything. It was a toga party. The bits that really stand out to me and, stand out in my memory were things like there's some images that you see over and over again. One iconic image is Shawn Michaels standing outside with wind blowing through his hair. It's a classic shot of Shawn in his black gear with Luna Vachon next.
Yeah,
and then you've got the there's a few other iconic pictures that you see over and over again. Yoko dominating Brett, the salt getting thrown in his face. There was some great standout moments that are real classics. Doink, the pageantry of Doink and all that whole storyline, all them bits stand out more than any of the other bits in that show for me. So it's more about the pageantry of the show. And also, one interesting fact, it was the first time JR used slobber knocker. He mentioned slobber knocker at one point in the show.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
He coined a bit of a living off of that phrase. Let's be honest. But I mean, for me, highlights for me, definitely enjoyed the Steiners versus the Head Shrinkers. That was a pretty awesome match that kind of lives up to today's standards as far as I'm concerned. It was really stiff, hard hitting, hard to watch at times, especially that bump over the top rope. Really enjoyed Shawn Michaels' entrance with Luna as well. Thought Luna looked fantastic. The Undertaker's entrance with the vulture or whatever it was, that bird of prey. But I think the biggest kind of memory for me, even before watching it back this week, was Bobby the Brain Heenan's entrance, going backwards on the camel. I mean, it makes me chuckle every time I see it. And, I kind of watched WrestleMania 9 back in chunks. So I was kind of watching a bit yesterday morning, a bit yesterday afternoon, a bit more this morning. But I always kind of started off my viewing by watching the opening sequence, the entrances of Macho Man and Bobby Heenan, before I skipped to where I was at previously. And that bit with Bobby Heenan just makes me laugh. And yes, but there we go. Mike, it was wonderful to kind of recap and relive WrestleMania 9 with you, my friend. It was so much fun and so many kind of memories. Now, hopefully the listeners will get a bit of a nostalgic feeling when they hear back, all of our kind of fun recollections of what went down WrestleMania 9. But before we say goodbye to you, do you have any social media handles, any Twitter, any Instagram, or any Facebook where my listeners can reach out to you, say hi, get in touch and find out more about Mike Angus?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Mike Maddog Angus on Facebook, so you can check me out on that. We've also got the TNT Extreme Wrestling page, so make sure you check that out as well. TNT up in Liverpool. We will have shows upcoming later on in the year, so make sure you check that out and get along. And then I've also got my Instagram, which is the Mad Dog Mike Angus as well. So check me out on Instagram. All my classic wrestling pictures are on there as well from back in the day. So pics with all the gang, just put Billy Gunn went up this week, and there's pictures with loads of the guys from back in the day. Shawn Michaels, Tatanka, the Steiners, all the old gang, and I loved all my classic wrestling, and I'm still involved now, still a big fan. So so make sure you check me out. I'll have a Twitter upcoming this week. That's the new thing. I've managed to avoid Twitter for years, but people are just telling me you've got to get a Twitter now. So yeah, my Twitter will be set up while I'm in lockdown. So keep your eyes peeled. That's coming up soon. And John, it was great to speak to you, mate. And keep doing what you're doing. You do a great job. And looking forward to hearing about other people's opinions of WrestleMania 9, what they thought. It's one that really stands out in the memory for me as a fond memories from my childhood. And I hope everyone gets that from listening to this today. And if you ever need me to review any other shows or check them out with you, just let me know, and I'll make sure to give them a watch and let you know my opinions on them. All right.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I'll tell you what, Mike, would love to get you back on the show to do a proper interview with you and kind of talk to you more in depth about your wrestling fandom and your career as a ring announcer. So we'll have to arrange that sometime soon. But listen, thank you so much for being on the Wrestling with Johners podcast. You've been a great guest. It's been so much fun talking to you about WrestleMania 9, and hopefully we'll catch up with you all again soon. And all the links to your Instagram and Facebook, they'll be attached to the description of this podcast. So if you're listening to this, just click into the description and start clicking on those social media links to catch up with the Mad Dog and find out what he's up to. But please keep it tuned to the Wrestling with Johners podcast for all of your weekly updates. Not so much wrestling to update you on, but we will be doing quite a few podcasts around WrestleMania season and recapping you on all the action there. And please don't forget to spread the word. Tell your friends, tell your family, and don't forget to subscribe to the Wrestling with Johners podcast. And don't forget to hit that, click on that subscribe button so you don't miss out on a single episode. Lots more from the Wrestling with Johners podcast. This is the first of 5 podcasts over 5 days from the Wrestling with Johners podcast. So keep it tuned, keep tuning into the Wrestling with Johners podcast, and I hope you all have a great week, and we'll catch up with you all again soon. Thanks for listening.